Hi everybody, Gary Simmons here with a new update for GI Racing 2, the Baltimore update. Although this update has a few tweaks and fixes, the main feature of this update is a brand new racetrack modelled on the street races of Baltimore. The new race scene is now complete with all new PBR materials and textures, and in fact this is a totally new track exclusive to GI Racing version 2. As you would expect, this racetrack has all the track surface modifiers defined for it that allow it to race in both the dry and wet weather conditions. We also now have all the emissive texture sets in place for this asset so that when racing at night it really comes alive. Now when you look at all of those glowing windows in this city, have some sympathy for poor old me, will you? I've just spent a week having to draw each of those windows into the emissive channels of each texture set. And of course, like the other race scenes in GI Racing 2, we also support the fog modifier in all combinations of day and night, dry and wet conditions. Notice also that we have trees affected by wind zones that blow more aggressively in the harsher weather conditions. In fact, the trees in the Baltimore scene may be of interest to some of you. Although Baltimore is not a terrain-based track, I didn't want to have to hand place all of the tree models myself. I wanted to use Unity's terrain system for that. Why? Well, firstly because the Terrain's tree painting tool allows us to very quickly place trees down, and it will automatically and randomly change the width, height, rotation and colour tint of those trees so that they don't all look the same. Sure, I could have done this by hand, but it would have taken ages having to place each instance into the scene, rotate it, scale it, colour tint it, etc. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, because this level has quite a lot of trees, I wanted them to benefit from the Terrain's tree LOD system, so that trees in the distance automatically get billboarded, etc. So I wanted the vegetation and tree features of the terrain, but I didn't want the actual terrain itself. This was accomplished by creating a Unity terrain that was large enough to encompass the race scene. I then made sure that the terrain was at the correct height to match that of the road surfaces. This was made much easier in the case of the Baltimore scene, as the entire racetrack is flat and on one level. I then turned down all of the detail controls of the terrain component, so it generates the lowest tessellated mesh possible. Then I assigned a custom shader, which we call the Null clip shader. This shader is used to render the terrain. The vertex shader simply moves the vertices behind the camera's near plane, forcing the render of the terrain to be clipped very early on in the rendering process. So the terrain is no longer rendering, but we haven't messed with the tree or vegetation shaders, so they all render as normal. The result, I can paint my trees and vegetation using the terrain tool into my Baltimore scene. I also fixed a bug in the track manager's custom inspector script that used to cause a null reference error to be generated by Unity when you added a new surface modifier. This didn't previously stop you from doing anything or break anything, but it wasn't nice to see, and that's now been fixed. I also added some new settings to the track manager's runtime settings section that allows you to apply a scale to the cars and their shadow blob projectors at scene startup. Now this should be used very carefully, as changing the scale of a car changes the size of its wheel colliders, alters the top possible speeds, and changes the size of the threat triggers, etc. So this is really nothing more than a useful hack for oversizing the cars, which can look quite nice sometimes for cinematic sequences. Also, this hack can really come to the rescue if you've just spent days laying down all of your AI data, your terrain vegetation and your camera triggers, and you find that perhaps the scale of your level was ever so slightly off, and you don't realize this until you start playing against the AI cars. These settings give you the ability, in a very hacky way, to tweak the relative scale of the cars and saves you having to redo all of your terrain and AI data. Finally, this update has all new tournaments defined and all new race definitions defined, so any replay files or user profile files from previous versions of GI Racing 2 will not be recognized by this version, will be completely ignored, okay? What can I say? That's just the cost of progress. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the new Baltimore asset and have some fun with it. Bye bye now.